society is moving toward people not having personal responsibility for their behavior, for their choices, for their safety. There's a great Wordsworth poem that he said, "In ourselves our safety must be sought, by our own right hand it must be wrought." We have to do it. And it won't be corporations, and it won't be government, and it won't be the police department. None of those are present in your environment in the time that you're facing the kinds of risks that we face. And even in the airplane, it's your responsibility, right? It's you. I'll give you a really interesting example that after 9/11, there was they improved the security of the cockpit, and various screening processes changed, and they put U.S. Marshals on board some flights. But there's 20,000 flights a day, and there's not 20,000 U.S. Marshals on board. And I actually opposed it, because what happens is that if you were going to be facing somebody trying to get into the cockpit, I want the passengers to get up and participate. I don't want them to think, the government's going to take care of it. In fact, I wanted it in the pre-flight instructions from say that if somebody tries to get into the cockpit,
yes,
we rely upon the passengers to participate.
I want Flight 93.
Protect the cockpit. That's right. Protect the cockpit door. But governments don't do that, because governments are in the total business of, we'll take care of it. We protect you in every regard.
It's the infantilizing
of course.
grown-ups.
Yeah. And so you brought it up in the context of skepticism, and there's a great quote in that book, by the way, from who was the great astronomer?
Seth
Sagan,
Rogen?
Carl Sagan.
Oh.
Carl Sagan.
Seth
and
Rogen.
it's a beautiful quote. Give me the book real fast. Actually, I'll find it so fast it's intentionally.
I know the quote.
On the very first page.
I know what you're gonna say.
Listen to how great this is. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, or to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes along. It wasn't enough, Jefferson said, to enshrine some rights in a Constitution or a Bill of Rights. This is the punchline. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism. Otherwise, we don't run the government runs us. And that is where we're living right now.
The fact that that's in this book, which I haven't nearly plugged sufficiently, and the fact that came from a scientist,
of course,
is wonderful.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. The book he's quoting from is called Cause Unknown, and even though Gavin won't take credit for it, he's mostly responsible for it. There's an intro by RFK Jr. The book itself was written by Edward Dowd, famous financial guy. BlackRock ran a $14 billion fund. And good God, man, this book, I mean, I know we're free associating, and I know we're over an hour, Chuck, but strap in.
It's all good.
It's going to go for a while. I've never read a book like this. I've never seen so many pictures in such a serious book. I've never seen such footnoting. I've never seen such backup. Folks, this book has QR codes.
Yeah, hundreds of QR codes.
Next to virtually every claim.
Yeah.
And I scanned a dozen of them. And it takes you down rabbit holes you probably don't want to explore. But one of the things Dowd does that's so great is he basically says what I've tried to do in every crazy endorsement relationship I've ever had, which is say, don't take my word for it.
Right. Yeah.
Just don't take my word for this. I'm not an idiot. I did my homework. You do yours.
Yeah.
And you give people the resources. And I mean, I'm probably going to do a poor job of summing this up, but you're just making a very compelling. You're not even making a case. You're asking some really uncomfortable questions about why 60,000 people have died in excess of that which we could reasonably expect. What's the official term?
Excess mortality.
Yes.
Yeah. Excess mortality is a measurement done by every country that has a good organized medical system, and it's a measurement of how many people die every year, which is about 3.5 million people, by the way, Americans. What ages are they? What are the causes of death? And we know that that number is going to be fairly constant, and when you have excess mortality, you always have to ask why, right? In this case, it's excess mortality among the exact population that has no reason to die. Young, fit, healthy people, working age Americans, pardon me, and working age Americans who are working, they are fit enough to go to work, so they're not in the hospital. And we had in 2021, we had a 40% increase in death claims for insurance companies. It was unheard of. There's a page in there that has all these news. Australia had it, the UK had it. And so one of the questions we have to ask is, did our mass vaccination program end up harming some people? Let's say that all vaccines have the intention to benefit you by keeping you from some particular disease, measles, mumps, polio, whatever it is, but all vaccines also have adverse effects for some people. And that equation has got to be reasonable, meaning it's got to be some people are going to be harmed by this vaccine, but millions are going to be saved, for example. But that's not the way this mass vaccination program worked. It ended up harming a tremendous number of people who wouldn't be harmed, young people. And what that book lays out is it asks the question, it shows you athletes, for example, young athletes dying right on the basketball court, right in front of people, never in the national news, by the way. Always, we had to get everything from local newspapers. But it shows you something that we've never seen. Nobody has ever been at a sporting event and some guy dropped dead, and certainly no 16-year-old kid. But there are hundreds of them in that book, hundreds, and where they are, they were publicly reported, and they are young people who died in their sleep, fit young athletes, and so we just have to ask the question about what are the possible causes. And sometimes the possible causes are hard to find, but in this case we at least have to be asking, and I'll give you a fast example of something from the Wall Street Journal. So when all these insurance companies reported this enormous excess death among working age Americans, young Americans, how do the insurance companies know? Because they're paying death benefits on them, and we know they're working because they're working for companies that provide that insurance.
And they're
them.
Scrupulous at this point.
Oh, they are in the business. They're actuaries, man. They're in the business of, they want to count every single one. So the Wall Street Journal did an article about that, acknowledging that the insurance companies were saying that they had a 40% increase in unexpected deaths. They don't insure expected deaths, by the way. So they had a 40% increase. And the Wall Street Journal said they listed 9 things that it could be. Late diagnosis because of lockdowns, delayed reaction from COVID, addiction, suicide because of layoffs and lockdowns and what have you. And they list 9 things, and they just don't bother to list the mass vaccination that was administered to working age Americans. So you have to, if you're not even willing to ask the question, if it's there's an electric fence around that topic, right? And electric fence topics are always filled with bullshit, and they are always not able to resist scrutiny. I'll give you some electric fence topics. Would be, transgender surgeries for people under 18. That's an electric fence topic. I'm not allowed to ask any questions about it. Mm-hmm. I'm not allowed to say, I don't know, maybe you don't start the hormone treatment until they're after 18. This is forbidden speech in America. Do vaccines cause adverse reactions? Childhood vaccines, is the balance good? And there's obviously many different vaccine products, including many that have been recalled. So when they're recalled because they were dangerous, that tells you not every vaccine is perfect. They're different products.
You need to just talk a little bit about, back to what's the promise? Safe and effective. People need to understand what that means to the FDA with regard,
CDC,
for instance,
yeah.
And the CDC. Take smallpox.
Yeah.
What qualifies as safe and effective for a smallpox vaccine?
Well, I'm glad you're asking, because it's the perfect example. So if you go to the CDC website right now and you look up smallpox and you look up the smallpox vaccine, they will tell you it's safe and effective. If you go to the Scripps Medical Center and look up smallpox, they will say it's not safe and effective. And so it's not a consensus on this thing. But in the case of the CDC website, they then list the people who are most likely with a smallpox vaccine, which is a very bad vaccine, by the way. I mean, it's got a lot of adverse events. They'll list for you on the CDC website right now the people who are most likely to experience an adverse event from the smallpox vaccine. And I want to give you some examples of who those people are. People with a family history of heart disease. In other words, 80% of the people in the United States. People with diabetes. In other words, 44% of the people in the United States. On and on. I'm not going to give you the actual stats here, but it's in that book. By the time you're done with them telling you who it's not safe for,
Nobody left.
Nobody left. And yet they will use the phrase "safe and effective" for that. And that phrase is like a hit single that they can't stop singing. The CDC is in the vaccine business. They never tell you about a vaccine problem. They only tell you. And by the way, just to correct myself on something, they did tell us about a vaccine problem with the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine, but they didn't pull it. All they did is they put it on the package insert. Yes, this can cause blood clots. Now they have on the package insert that this vaccine can cause myocarditis, that Moderna and Pfizer can cause myocarditis in young people. Well, the problem is no consumer of a COVID vaccine ever sees the package insert. Right? You go to a pharmacy and they give you the injection. Right. Nobody says, would you like to see the package insert before you make this decision?
And we weren't coming out of a time when people were reading the fine print. People were desperate for an authoritative figure to give them the truth. And what they found was they were living in an age where experts simply didn't agree on really anything at all. Yeah. I think about Vioxx, man, and what happened with Merck. I'll ask you about that, but by way of explanation, I'll tell you, in another life, I was the Tylenol guy. I did 30 ads for Tylenol.
Right.
It's back in the, was in the 90s? I guess it was in the mid-90s. And, they had the lion's share of the market. And so it was a zero-sum game. Everybody who's taking any kind of aspirin is already taking it. So the only way to get new share is to attack one or the other, right? So it's a knife fight in a phone booth, right? And I remember in the midst of all that, learning that if aspirin came onto the market today as a new product, it would never make it onto the shelf.
Yeah.
Because 80,000 people a year wind up in the hospital with stomach bleeding.
I'm one of them. Yeah.
So that's why this book matters. And that's why the Vioxx story is, people mustn't forget that. But what hope do we have of remembering that when we're currently in the process of trying to put COVID in the rearview mirror?
Yeah.
We're not curious, and we don't want to be skeptical, it seems.
Well, I think governments are very sophisticated throughout history. This is not a comment on the American government. This is just governments and people in power in general are in the business of saying, we'll take care of it, right? We scare you first. So it would be the witch doctor saying, oh, you have the snake in your soul and only these beads, and he shakes it and he scares you, and you listen, and nobody says go and learn, right? Everybody wants you to listen to authority, be it the chief of the village or the king or the president or whatever. And so in the case of Vioxx, as an example, Vioxx, there were 16 very important studies done on Vioxx that were published in advance of it being put out. They were favorable. They were all written by people who worked for Merck, the manufacturer.
If you like what you heard, and even if you don't, won't you please, pretty please, subscribe. Well, I hate to bear